and thank you all for joining today's webinar, The Importance of Automation During a Pandemic. I'm Carolyn Mathis, partner at Harborview Advisors, and I'd like to thank NLP Logix for hosting today's webinar. I'm joined today by three very accomplished experts in the AI and data community. Our panelists are here to share their insights about the importance of AI and automation and provide guidance on how businesses can leverage AI to grow faster, even or perhaps especially amidst today's current climate. So allow me to introduce our panelists. First, we are joined by Matt Berseth, co-founder and lead data scientist at NLP Logix. Matt has gained extensive experience in data science through his career in software development across industries including healthcare, marketing, and logistics. His focus has been in developing and deploying predictive modeling applications into production environments. He holds a master's in computer science and has competed in a number of the international data science competitions hosted by Kaggle.com, consistently scoring in the top 10 contestants. Matt was also a finalist in Chameleon 16 and has been named as one of Jacksonville Business Journal's 40 Under 40. Next, I am pleased to introduce Kate Strachnyi. Kate is the founder of Story by Data, where she focuses on helping companies in the AI, machine learning, and data science space tell their stories. She also delivers training on data visualization best practices via the Dedicated Academy. She has been selected as the LinkedIn top voice in data science and analytics in both 2018 and 2019. Additionally, she is the host of the Humans of Data Science video podcast and runs the Dedicated Community Challenge. And finally, please welcome Ben Taylor, co-founder and chief AI officer at Zeff. Hot off the press today, it was just announced that Zeff is being acquired by DataRobot. So congratulations, Ben. And then just continuing with Ben's bio here, his mission is to further the boundaries of what is possible with data science. He spends as much time as he can working with deep learning, natural language processing, and all forms of data science, combining the power of genetic programming with deep learning to automate network design. He is most well known for his machine learning work with the data science community and with HireVue, where he joined as their first data scientist. Thank you all for being here and sharing your insights with us. Today, we'll take a closer look into automation. With the COVID-19 public health crisis, our economy has experienced what economists refer to as an exogenous shock, forcing businesses to quickly adapt to a new reality. Each shock leaves in its wake permanent changes. And as we think about the legacy of this pandemic, accelerated technology adoption will likely be one of the lasting changes that we attribute to this crisis. This seems particularly true with automation. It's no secret that the trend towards increased automation has been happening for a long time. But today, we will explore how this crisis has been a catalyst for accelerating that trend and how companies can leverage automation to address their current challenges. So let's kick off the discussion. I'll start with Matt, but I'd love all our panelists' view on this topic. So Matt, with NLP Logix's national reach and position as a leading AI firm, I'd love to get your take on some of the benefits of automation.
Yeah, good question. So, from our standpoint, I think it's hard to overestimate the value of automation in a business context. What we've seen is that a lot of businesses have a lot of cost in labor, and anytime you can have automation, taking things that are today done manually or by humans and convert that into software and processes, then you get a lot of advantages, like you can potentially reduce costs. There's often some upfront R&D involved, but then over time, the labor costs go down. And coupled with that, you get some nice side effects like, potentially 24/7 type of operations, whereas, people go home at night or the weekends. When you have automation and robots and software robots doing things 24/7, there's new use cases that open up. And a lot of the underlying advantages are, optimization, reducing cost, and just running kind of a more efficient business.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. I just want to add on that. So you made a few good points. Reducing labor cost. You're right. It does take some upfront cost to put that together, but in the long run, I do agree that there's going to be a reducing cost. What I was going to say is there's also a huge time savings, right? And I think it goes hand in hand with the reduced cost. But very quick personal story. I finally have onboarded myself to Calendly. Combined with Zoom, and that personally, that automation in itself has saved me so much time with the back and forth email exchanges of, when are you available? Okay, I'm available at this time. How about you? Oh yeah, me too. I'm available at that time. And it adds the Zoom link, and for me, that's just saved so much time for my business. But in addition to that, you mentioned that 24/7 availability. Completely agree with that, because humans have this tendency to sleep and take breaks, which is crazy, I know, but I think robots don't really need, or robotic process automation can relieve some of those humans to go home and take rest. But in addition to that, it also helps you stay consistent with what you're doing, because humans also have a tendency to make mistakes. And not to say that automation is always going to be perfect, but I think once you've got it set up and running, it's easier to be consistent in your production or your service or whatever it is that you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So to add to that, I like the consistency mentioned, because it reminds me of an embarrassing story that I have. When I used to work at Intel, I did shift work, and I was bragging to my coworkers that I would work all night and ski all day. Like there's some magical thing where that would be possible. And I remember one night, right around Christmas time, I made a mistake, and that mistake ended up costing tens of thousands of dollars. And this is stuff that happens on a regular occasion. This happens for engineers, but it was a mistake because I wasn't mentally, my cognitive abilities weren't what they should have been, probably because of sleep deprivation, where we get these processes where humans can struggle with consistency. And I think sometimes when we think about automation, it can feel very negative, like automation is anti-human, or automation is the computer versus the human. And I feel like I take a very different perspective, where I see automation as it, and I think this will come up later on this panel where we'll get into some of the details and stories, but automation, it allows people that are trapped in mundane, repetitive processes to focus more of their creative energies on new processes. So for some of these engineers that I worked with, they would spend 6 hours doing some type of excursion analysis or review. And an excursion means when something was misprocessed. And that ended up being automated to where that analysis was done essentially in a few minutes. And so for those engineers to go from 6 hours of work to a few minutes, it doesn't mean they were laid off. It means they were allowed to put their creative energies on new processes.
Yeah, that's good. I was going to say, you said something interesting there, Ben, too, which was the predictable mistakes versus kind of the unpredictable mistakes. And I think you could think of, a system. What would you rather have, a relatively small number of unpredictable mistakes that could lead to custom investigation and sort of custom work, or a larger number of mistakes that are maybe predictable by some automation that then you can actually have, some other business processes or workflows built around. So yeah, I agree with that consistency. At least you're getting the repeatability, even if it's not perfect, but just the repeatability in consistent ways.
And the other thought there is the accountability, which you hit on. So AI is accountable. If it's going to make mistakes, it actually tells you ahead of time, I'm not that sure, and I'm going to be wrong this % of the time. But imagine asking a human that. It's, you want me to tell you my type 1, type 2 error? Like, you want me to tell you my confidence? It feels very weird.
Yeah, humans, right. I think, always think they're going to be 100% accurate. So no one's going to say, okay, I'm going to make mistakes here. Here we go. Hire me. So.
Yeah, and then on the R&D, I was curious of this. I don't know, it's just kind of popped in my head. So it's like, what we see is that, there's a big R&D cost to get to those labor savings, but the labor savings over years is tremendous. I feel like if there's an example of that at play today that we're all familiar with, I feel like it's something like Uber, where it's like, so today you have manually people driving the cars, and then you have Uber making a huge investment in automated, driverless cars, and you can see the big R&D investment. Then you can also see what that would mean for their business if if they didn't have to have as many people driving those cars. You can kind of, that's at a very different scale, but I feel like it's something that you can kind of relate to. Yeah, maybe it's 3 years down the line, but if you get there, imagine what that does to their margins on their services.
Yeah, I think it'll tend to pay off with proper execution. It'll pay off in the long run.
Yeah.
And I think that's relevant to the current situation. So maybe we can segue into that. It seems like with this crisis, the need for automation has only increased right now. So Ben, maybe you can give us your perspective on the COVID-19 and its impact on business.
Yeah, it's been really sad and surprising how many businesses have been impacted. I was talking to someone yesterday who was doing some construction work. We're selling our house, by the way, which is probably the worst time to sell it, but here we go. We're going to sell our house during COVID. So I was talking to this contractor, and he was saying during 2008 he was hit really hard. Anyone in the construction sector was hit really hard. But with COVID, I have been amazed at which industries are hurting. So I was talking to a physician last week, and he was mentioning, oh yeah, we just did layoffs. And you're thinking, layoffs? What do you mean? It's healthcare. Why would you lay anyone off during healthcare? It's a health crisis where they're hurting. Their typical cash flow streams from elective surgeries aren't happening right now. And so they're hurting. And then oil and gas, did we ever think we would see negative prices per barrel? Like, what does that even mean? And so the oil industry is doing layoffs, tech. It's hard for me to think of. I think there are very few companies that aren't hurting. Maybe in Amazon, maybe some of these e-commerce companies are doing well. So the effects are everywhere. Cost reduction is top of mind. Cash is king during a recession like this. And so a lot of people are looking for opportunities to cut cost. And then the other thought there is digital transformation. It's something that we keep talking about. And I feel like it was never urgent. It was like a nice to have. It's like, well, you got to digitally transform. And maybe some of us have even been involved on talks where we're talking about digital transformation. It's got to happen. This is a priority. Where now with COVID, the urgency is extreme. So we're seeing overnight digital transformation, telemedicine, and some of these things are good. And so I don't want this to be all bad. Like, why didn't we have telemedicine several years ago? Why should I take my child with a snotty nose to the doctor's office physically so they can get other people sick when I can get a prescription through? So there are some benefits that are coming, but across the board, you see urgency with digital transformation, which will have long-term benefits, but unfortunately, short-term costs.
Yeah, just to jump in there on some of those. So, from our standpoint, the urgency of the digital transformation, what we saw from some of our customers were, automation plans that were kind of on the back burner. And then as COVID came up, the automation became front and center because the people that were doing those tasks weren't able to get to the keyboard or weren't able to come into work. And so for some of our customers, it flipped the roadmap essentially to really, get the business adapted quickly to, labor that may or may not be able to come into the office. Kind of interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'm going to stay on that urgency part because I've witnessed this firsthand. A close friend of mine, he's been wanting to work from home for the longest time, but he works at a firm that's kind of a little bit slower in terms of getting into the remote working and the digital perspectives on things. And because of COVID, they basically all had to go remote, and it's been working well for the past 2 months. And now it's kind of a question of how are employers going to justify having people come in every single day, for 8-9 hours a day when you've noticed that they can do the work very easily from home. I think the other thing I wanted to bring up is, there's been talk about robots coming in to take our jobs. And, there's that fear factor of, oh no, what am I going to do now? But I think now a lot of people are hoping that, we could have those robots that can come and take some of these jobs, like, delivering medicine, like Ben mentioned, or cleaning up hospital rooms and sanitizing things. I think in the future we will have robots taking care of those high risk jobs. So the other thing I think we're going to see is a lot more contactless equipment, right? Even in my house now we have soap that you go like this and it dispenses soap into your hand. So I think we're definitely going to move more towards that. How do we avoid touching each other? How do we, pay with our phone without exchanging cash or credit cards? So I think it's going to increase some of that as well.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. So Kate, at Story by Data, you work with a lot of businesses and helping them leverage data and uncover trends. Are there certain businesses that you find can benefit more from using data, or certain industries where you see this having a really big impact?
Yeah, I think, from any company I've worked with or worked at, data has always been a large component of what we do. And I think it's relevant for every single business, no matter how big or small. Data is always going to be there to help you make data-driven decisions, as long as you're using that data properly and understanding what you're actually looking at. But I think the companies that are going to be most impacted with the use of data are the on-demand services, right? Like we spoke about Uber, Airbnb, Grubhub. Some of these services I use, Uber and Grubhub, we used to use a lot more when I used to get out of the house and order food. But I think, they depend so heavily on data, because for Uber, you have to see where's the demand, when is it going to peak, how many drivers do we need, or driverless cars, to Matt's point, in the future. So yeah, I'd say the on-demand services. But in general, I think every company is impacted with data, and I think they all have to use it wisely.
I love Kate's brand because the storytelling part attached to data is never talked about, but it needs to be talked about because it's such a big deal. And so recently I've been reading about storytelling, where storytelling is unbelievably powerful, because if you succeed, it's actually a one-way bridge. So if you can succeed with storytelling with data, you give people insight where they can't go back. It's, transformative insight. And I would have never thought I would care about storytelling or read like storytelling books, but they have really powerful concepts. And so just the concept of storytelling with data, I feel like it's next level. Like it's because storytelling suggests an emotional component. And a lot of times with data, we would never talk about an emotional driver. But yeah, anyway, just geeking out for a second.
Yeah, no, it's interesting you bring that up, because in another session I was just speaking at, we were talking about data storytelling, and somebody from the audience asked a question about, are we telling this story with charts, or are we using our data to tell the story? Because it's kind of, there's a slight nuance there, right? Because sometimes your management team wants you to tell a story with your data, and you can kind of make charts tell any story that you'd like, depending on how you format them, how you structure them, what kind of charts you use. But I think it always comes down to looking at your actual data and seeing what story that data tells you, and going from there. So I think there's just a slight difference there.
Yeah.
We've always found, go ahead, Carolyn.
No, I was just going to say, in our business, in investment banking, we're in the business of telling companies stories. And we always think about it that way because a story is so powerful. People remember stories in a way that is hard to just remember facts and figures. So totally agree. Sorry, Matt, go ahead.
No, I was just going to add a comment on kind of that emotional attachment. Like one thing that we repeatedly, we experience over and over again, which is when we start an engagement, a lot of times the first thing we do is we just visualize the data and just show it back to the customer to say, this is your data, this is how we see it, maybe some interpretation, maybe some charts, but, I think that when somebody sees the data visually, there's a meaning there, and, that it's much more concrete, much, less abstract is that, that database on that thumb drive or whatever. But when you show them the interactivity and the relationships and you just start scratching at that. Always love the big eyes and oh my gosh, what, I knew that was happening. I couldn't say it, but I knew that was happening.
So speaking of stories, Ben, maybe you can give us some of your stories and experiences of working with clients to bring automation to the forefront.
Yeah. So working with AI in industry it's challenging because in the past we've had to educate the prospect or the buyer. And I think we're past the hype cycle. So the hype cycle before, people would buy AI or invest in AI for the sake of it. they hadn't really done the research. And this actually reminds me of the embarrassing big data hype. So do you remember when everyone was big data, we need big data. We're going to have a data lake. It'll be fantastic. Where if you wanted to be rude today, you'd say, what are you going to do with that data lake? Like once you get it, what are you going to do with it? And so I think when we talk to prospects, we really have to talk about value. I call this the gap of doability, where a lot of buyers and executives, they actually don't think you can help them with their problem. And so there's a strange disconnect between what is possible and what they think is possible. And the best way to bridge that is with a case study, but with AI, there's too many applications. So we don't have a case study for every use case. So we've done work for clients from manufacturing to insurance to marketing. For this particular marketing group we were working with, there was hesitation. There wasn't a lot of excitement around artificial intelligence. And I would say there was just enough excitement to allow for free proof of concept. Paid? No way. Free? Sure. So we did a free proof of concept, and we were able to exceed the accuracy on their humans. So for the humans that are selecting these marketing opportunities, we exceeded the accuracy. And so someone who's maybe a little bit more naive might say, so the entire department was fired, right? You fired the entire department. It's no. If anything, they grew the department, because now that goes back to you're allowing humans to escape a process and do creative work. And what are the humans doing? They're focusing on, well, why is this algorithm working this way? What is being prioritized? And this gets back to the storytelling. Because if you can convince a SME or a subject matter expert why an algorithm is behaving this way, that's going to be really exciting for them. They're going to take a lot of creative energy and thinking, well, what else could we put in as a feature? And so when we talk about AI, we talk about inputs and outputs. You can call those features and predictions. And you don't have to be technical to come up with new ideas for features, especially for your domain. And I'll bring one quick criticism. I think with data science, we brand ourselves as being experts in programming, experts in math, and we can ramp on a domain quickly. The reality for me has been we will never ramp on a domain to the level of a true expert. And by an expert, I mean it could be an underwriter in insurance or a technician in manufacturing. They have a decade of experience. We might be able to talk to them, but we can't be an expert. And anyway, yeah, so it's a painful process. There are definitely wins to be had. There's not a lot of excitement unless there's a case study, but there are wins that are out there. So I'll stop there. I know Matt and Kate have plenty to add.
Yeah, I can jump in here. I know that, so we do have a lot of experience. I'd say it's interesting kind of riding that hype cycle, going back, 9 or 10 years. In our minds, we tell the story about the year, I don't know if you guys remember this, but the year that Watson bought the Masters and every commercial was a Watson commercial. For us, that was great because, it was educating people on things that, we just weren't getting the reach to. And so that was a big moment for us. But then what happened right after that was these expectations of, AI and ML, they're going to solve every problem. And so we sort of rode that curve. And we, when you get into that situation where expectations are sort of not in line with reality, that's a tough place to be, especially from an AI or a data science project when you're working on that. So I feel like where we've sort of leveled or landed at is definitely when we go and build an automation roadmap, we're almost always starting with questions like, let's put in benchmarks. Let's talk about doing an assessment. Let's see where you're at. Let you have some assumptions. Let's test those. Let's poke a little bit. A lot of what we do is automate tasks that are, people are working on today. So a lot of what we do is put together time study data to say, it's 20 minutes to do this unit of work now. Let's get that to 18 and then to 15 and then work our way down. And I think we've found that iterative notion where you're sort of, hey, we're not going to go all the way to perfection, but let's start chipping away. For us, we've had a lot more success in that world than, hey, we're going to just, give us 12 months and we'll just get there. Instead, we just kind of chip away collaboratively. And I think we've had a lot of success doing that.
Yeah,
We've paid the price over the years, but we've ended in a good spot, I'd say.
Yeah, I agree with you, Matt. The iterative approach is definitely better. And to Ben's point, yeah, we'll never be the true experts in the domain unless that's something that we did in our past life and became a data scientist and just happened to be experts. So we definitely have to take the domain experts along with us on the journey. But I think, Ben, you sent a video of you doing a panel discussion with Cassie Kozyrkov and a few others, and there's something there that she said. I didn't watch the whole thing, but I remember I clearly watched her talking about AI, and I love the way she described it as an island of people, where if we tell the business not to think of AI as something that's going to change everything and save the world from whatever issue you're having, but instead think of it as an island full of people that are going to do whatever you tell them to do on either repeated basis. And I really like that example because it lets you think about what are the tasks that you really should be automating, right? Because AI is never going to be perfect, right? But at least that tells you where you can start with when you're starting on that automation journey. It allows you to pick those specific tasks that can help you get those success stories and basically sell it to the business in that sense, where you can show them examples.
Yeah, so listening to both your answers, it reminded me about the value-based. So when you're talking about a process, Kate, what is the value of this if we do succeed?
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like I've made so many mistakes in my career. I always love to pull off a piece of scar tissue. Sorry about that visualization. Just say, here you go. Don't make this mistake.
Yeah.
And one of the mistakes we've made is really focusing on value. And so if I'm talking to an e-commerce company or some other company that's dealing with images, or here's an example. So if I'm working with an insurance company and they want to know if there's a swimming pool in an image, because that is a risk factor,
Right.
Can AI do that? If you have a data set where a human can look at the data set and decide yes or no, then AI is sophisticated enough. Yes, a human, not only can AI do it, it can probably exceed the human. The question that should have been asked was, what is that worth?
Right.
If we succeed, what is it worth? And the problem is it's not worth millions of dollars. And the joke is it's worth more than zero. So we can all agree it's worth more than zero. And then one of the sad things, or not the sad things, but I think this is kind of funny. We came up with this joke that if you ever start an AI project with, wouldn't it be cool? I don't need to hear the rest of it. I already know it's a dumb project. Not dumb as it's not creative, it's not innovative, but it doesn't have the value. Because some of the biggest value add projects, they are a little boring, like hospital readmittance or click-through rate on e-commerce. Incredibly valuable, boring. Anyway, mistakes.
That's good. I mean, I like that comment. So the boring piece, I think to me, the other piece is, I think that, you pick up an AI research paper and you get a really nice architecture of a deep network and it's got perfect data coming in and you got really pretty predictions coming out. I would say that is, yes, that's a component to the system that's built. But there is blocking and tackling. Like when you put that thing into a living, breathing solution, you might have some less pretty portions of the logic that are doing more mundane things, that aren't as sexy as a deep neural network, but are also part of the process and delivering real value on this kind of boringish domain. I think that's pretty interesting. That's a really good point.
Well, and you hit on, a lot of companies aren't ready from a data perspective. They have big AI ambitions and appetite, but when you look under the hood, you realize, oh, you should have talked to us last year. So you could have gotten ready with your data quality, your data integrity. Call us in 6 months, because they're not. Yeah, so many issues just with data quality and prep to even have an opportunity to use automation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've seen a lot, we do, because of our engagement style, we do that kind of assessment. We see a lot of what we call tinkering, which would be, they recognize that there's value in doing these things, and they realize that maybe they have a lot of data. They're not yet sure, or they don't know yet. They don't have the right data, to your point. and then they maybe have some ambitious team members that kind of go off and tinker for a couple of months turns into a year turns into 2 years. And then at that point, they're kind of behind, they're behind the curve at that point, and they've missed, they're behind now. Whereas they thought they were ahead, they're all of a sudden behind, and, and kind of need a rescue, if you will. So we run into that a lot too, just underestimating the problem, overestimating the capabilities, and not having a solution for dealing with the data.
So Matt, walk us through some more detail about how you guide your clients through that journey of an automation program. Give us a little bit more detail about what that journey looks like.
Yeah, so I think for me, one of our customers that I get the most excited about, because it's been a multi-year roadmap, which, all in AI, and it started way at the beginning from, people kind of doing very labor-intensive activities, and us sitting down with them and kind of thinking, hey, where do we want to get to? Like, what is the 5-year vision? But then back that up into chunks where we can hit milestones and we can measure progress, basically. And this project, very complex, but I think it's neat because it started with, an RPA component to go out, the robotic process automation, little robots going out and downloading and getting data out of systems and then dumping them into kind of a repository. And, that was a big win. Like, just that was like a milestone. And then, evolving that into, okay, now we have all these documents. Now let's start looking at, Ben had said that a lot of this is inputs and outputs, and so now we can start to distill, let's build some features on top of this documentation, and let's look at how that relates to what the outputs were, what were the people doing as part of this process. And so what we kind of do is, we have that big roadmap, and then we chunk it out in 12-month, 18-month timeframes, and then we hit that goal, and then we kind of readjust that next 12 to 18 months because things change a little bit, but that's one of my favorite stories, because I feel like they've come the furthest, and they're realizing a lot of the value, so it's pretty exciting.
That reminds me, we would always talk about crawl, walk, run. You definitely need an evolution. I think some people think they're going to have Jarvis, the robot from Iron Man, they're going to have Jarvis level technology next week. And it's like, well, maybe, but a crawl, walk, run. And yeah, so no, I think that's great to kind of lay out that kind of the expectations and get those milestones like you mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's great to hear success stories. So, any other specific success stories that any of you can share about some of your clients' journeys with this?
Like that marketing example I was giving before, I mentioned that there was kind of lukewarm reception, like essentially to the level of a free POC. But once the results were realized, it led to a transformative change. And so that actually went all the way up to the board level, essentially rebranded the company and redirected the ship. And we've seen similar things in the past. So working at HireVue, they also realized that. So sometimes when you add automation, it can have a transformative effect on a company where they can explore new markets. Because now they could compete in new advertising markets that are not cost effective for a human to compete in. And now HireVue can compete in the assessment space where it was not cost effective for a human IO psychologist to manually build out these assessments where AI can do it for them. So a lot of AI projects fail for, I think, reasons that have already been discussed. There's big ambitions, inexperience, tinkering, lack of resources, it's curiosity. But there are AI projects out there that they win at a transformative level all the way up to the executive team with the right problem. But you have to get the right people involved. You have to get the subject matter experts, the business component. It's way too easy to work on a problem that doesn't matter. Swimming pool from space. Can AI do it? Yes. Are the technophiles excited? Yes. Was it worth doing? No.
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah, or maybe, yeah, maybe it is. Maybe it is doing, but worth doing. But the value questions need to come up really early with the right people.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I do have another success story to share. So this is in the compliance, regulatory compliance space in banks. And this is where I kind of spent most of my time before I got into data science and analytics. But essentially, there are so many regulations, and for me, it was based in the U.S. But regulatory requirements that basically tell banks what to do in different situations, and a lot of times, the types of data that needs to be available. And those regulations don't really stay the same for a very long time. So they come out with new regulatory requirements. And the one thing that I've seen was a successful implementation of robotics process automation was basically having RPA read the new regulatory requirements, compare it to the old ones, and tell you exactly what the new things are that a bank has to do. And I don't remember the exact numbers, but it was just hundreds of hours of consultants' times reading through that, parsing the regulatory requirements, and then trying to understand what the requirements were. So, to Ben's point, not sure if this was the best way to do it, but I think in the long run, it definitely paid off. You kind of have to take a risk with some of these projects, but I think the more you can assess and predict, the better.
And the risk component's a big deal, because I think that's why you have to get a quick win out of the gate. Because as companies get these wins, their appetite for risk increases. And like Kate mentioned, like this, if you're willing to take more risks, the opportunity for you to find transformative, competitive insights is higher, but probably not recommended out of the gate. So get those wins, get the momentum, come up with a roadmap, and then things get really exciting.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, thank you guys so much. That was really exciting to hear about those examples. I think at this point, we'll go and open it up to the questions from the audience. So the first question we have, what strategies have you used to educate companies on what they can do to drive efficiencies in AI?
So I can start with this one. So getting back to the emotional component or the storytelling piece, I have a lot of fun presenting to companies where I love to shock them. I love to show them some AI use case that feels like it's beyond this world. So show them GANs, so show them some reinforced learning, show them something that shocks them to the point they're going to go home and tell their family about it. They'll say, "You'll never guess what I saw at work today." And so I have a lot of fun with that, but I think we talked about it earlier on this panel. A lot of people don't think AI can solve their problem. There's this gap of doability that they are unwilling to cross without a case study. And I think as you show them what is possible in the year 2020, when you really shock them and show them, it makes them realize that AI definitely can solve their problem if you have the right people and the right data set. Like the right data set is a huge concern, because even with the right team, the right technology, garbage in, garbage out. So if you have the wrong data set, and we're seeing this with COVID. So COVID is like, well, the number of deaths from the New York Times versus John Hopkins are different, where like from a data perspective, we'd say death is a fantastic objective measure. It can't be tricked, it can't be lied about, but we see inconsistencies. And so we're seeing it in firsthand with all the data inconsistencies. But I'm kind of getting off track. I like to inspire and excite people with more ridiculous AI examples, but then end with practical.
Yeah, Ben, I think it's really good to show them and shock them and wow your audience. I think another method is showing them the potential, either cost saving or whatever those efficiencies might be, right? Do the math for them. If it's going to save $100,000 or an X number of hours of labor, then do that math and put that in front of their face. Use data visualization to tell that story. Show emotion. I think that's something that I've seen that's worked well.
Yeah, and actually, it's kind of funny. So we have a similar strategy of the, so obviously case studies are awesome. If you have a case study, there's no doubt, show them that. Case studies always carry the day. But short of that, one thing that we found a lot of value in is saying, here is a problem that I think we can all agree is much harder or is more complex, and then lead them to the conclusion that, hey, if we can build algorithms to do this, and the example we used was like, detect cancer in a high resolution pathology slide or something. So like, if you're in the mindset that, hey, I get that we can build algorithms to do those things. We don't have the case study for your very specific use case. However, I think that we can all agree that if we're able to build technology that can do these amazing things, it's reasonable to think that we can apply some of those same techniques to your very specific domain. So we've adopted similar strategies at times.
Okay, great. Another question from the audience. What is an example of really bad data that you've worked with for a client, and how did you overcome it?
So I'll start here, and I'll just make a note that I've actually been pretty lucky where I haven't had to work with too much dirty data or messy data. There was one survey I had to work with where it was, for the most part, not a multiple choice survey, and there were thousands of responses. So it was free text. That was my first experience working with unstructured data. But it's also one of my biggest success stories, because we were able to use software to automate the process of reading that free text and categorizing things into buckets, and basically pulling some really cool insights out of a huge text file. But other than that, I don't have any scary dirty data stories, unfortunately.
Oh man, do you want to go first, Matt? Or do you want to go next?
I got a small one. I don't have a dirty data. I have a crazy data, which is a client who really wanted phases of the moon incorporated. Did not go down that path, but that's more in the crazy bucket.
I want to hear more, Matt.
Yeah,
This sounds like an important model. This sounds like a stock model.
It's not too different. Yeah.
So when you start interacting with people that aren't familiar with data and the machine learning process, you can be surprised by the things. It's almost like a hoarder, and you go into their house for the first time thinking that there's going to be something delightful or helpful. And so I remember meeting with a potential prospect. They wanted to predict some type of lead scoring, and coming from my background, coming into a problem, if the data quality is there, I feel pretty confident. So I think initially with the meeting, I'm going to the meeting with high confidence. How much data do you have? Tens of thousands of rows. Good. We'll build a fantastic predictive model. And when we sat down and reviewed the data, it was first name, last name, address, in a classifier. Like, you're going to build lead scoring from like first name, last name, and an address. And I remember being really disappointed, thinking, like, a human, and that kind of became the line in the sand for me, where the question is, can a human differentiate with this data set? So if I give you a row that's a good address and a row that's a bad address, like you can imagine. And also this kind of highlights some ethical concerns, because why are you saying this is bad? Is it because it's a poor neighborhood? Is it because of the zip code? Like, a lot of bias comes into that process. So that was an example where completely starved of features. We were dealing with another customer where they had a very large data set of images where they had only been labeled one way. So they had invested months and months of time with all these humans doing work where they're labeling. So they see this, they label. They see this, they label. And they only had one label, and they had never labeled the alternative. And so all the opportunities they had to bring in, because it was supposed to be a binary classifier, all the opportunities they had to bring in, they had not done that. And so all of the data they had collected was, essentially garbage or lost. And then my favorite example was dealing with Salesforce data. So Salesforce data sounds great. And I remember someone exporting some Salesforce data, and you're following a time series down a column. Time series jumps over here, jumps back, where there was like column data inconsistency. And from a data science perspective, what am I supposed to do that? Throw that away, throw that away, throw that away. So it just becomes a lot of manual. So one of the complaints of data science is we spend 80% of our time cleaning up garbage. And it's not our garbage, it's other people's garbage.
Of course, it's not our garbage.
Yeah, it's not our garbage. I'm sure I've got garbage examples that I created, but.
So a follow-up question on that. In certain cases, getting high quality data might be a challenge. How do you tackle that? What's your take on synthetic data and any other approaches that could possibly address this challenge?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, to sort of piggyback a little bit on that last question too, is, you know, modeling, it is garbage in, garbage out. I mean, if you may have great image data that has been pointed out, if you don't have very good labels, you're really hamstrung. And you know, depending on the project that we're working on, even though we're not domain experts, oftentimes we will spend a lot of time identifying the process to capture those labels. If it's in the medical domain, and identifying how we're going to annotate medical images, or if it is in a different domain where we need to pick out pools from space or something. But if you do that wrong, like the way we describe it is like, you can have a great model, like a great algorithm, it's world class, but if you mess up the labeling part, you're probably not going to have a good project. You know, it's not going to be successful. But the reverse sometimes can be true. Like if you nail the labeling part and you really have high quality curated data, you probably don't need the world's best, deepest network to actually have a successful solution. So, so we spend a lot of time on that curation part. We find a ton of value in synthetic data generation, augmentation, anything that can let us add, you know, dimensions to the data set, where we use Ben's test as well. If a human looks at this, would they, you know, what would they think? Could they still identify it or not? And we kind of use that as our litmus test for, is that a good synthetic, or is this just garbage and noise? But yeah, I mean, data, you know, I don't know if Kate or Ben said it, but it's like, you know, the allure to data science is you get to write these awesome algorithms. The reality is you spend your head in data, you know, all day long, which is great, because you can't have the good models without doing that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And just one point, I know people always say that GIGO, right? Garbage in, garbage out. I've heard another term more recently, I think it was Scott Taylor, the data whisperer, who said goodness in, goodness out. So there's the flip side, right? So if you start, when you're starting the data collection process, the data generation process, if you really focus on the data quality component and make sure that that is your focus early on, the sooner you look at that, the better, obviously. And to Ben's point in Salesforce data, I probably spent about 10 years on different companies, different projects, working with Salesforce data. So I feel your pain, Ben. But yeah, I mean, aside from that, data quality, I think working with algorithms, I think we just have to have some level of comfort knowing that it's not ever going to be 100% perfect and the way we need it. And like we discussed early on, we just have to have that assumption. And obviously this isn't great in some industries where that assumption can lead to life or death situations. But in general, if you're looking at click-through rates, you don't have to wait until your data quality is just pristine and 100% before you can start implementing projects.
Okay, another question from the audience. Which data modeling tool do you use for training data set?
I'll get a short answer. It depends on the data set. A lot of times during discovery, we want to know, is it structured? Is it text? Is it image? Is it video? Is it audio? And so depending on the data set, there are some pretty sophisticated tools to handle that. I would say the lion's share of the problems around the data quality, the stuff we've already talked about. Model selection, you know, honestly, you could take a panel on LinkedIn today. They'll tell you which model, what's the sexiest model today, but that's usually not required.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree. We, you know, we use a wide variety of models. Just to make it concrete, we tend to stay in terms of, you know, something in, we develop a lot of our models in Python using, if it's sklearn or OpenCV or TensorFlow or any one of those packages. That's where we spend, or are any of those common data science modeling tools where we spend a lot of the time for models.
Okay, great. Another question from the audience. Our company is always afraid that any sort of transformation will take a huge amount of time to implement and to see any payoff. What's the time frame that you usually see in an AI project?
Internally 2 years, externally 2 months. Is that a terrible thing to say?
Yeah, I think the answer is it depends, right? It depends on the type of project, what's involved. But I think, Matt, you're the one who said that we need to try to have an iterative approach and see if our goal here is to save time in, what takes us an hour to do now, if we can do it in 50 minutes and 40 minutes and 30 minutes and kind of get those small, quick wins to show the value and demonstrate that you're actually making progress. I think that's the way to go. Because one of the bigger mistakes you can make in the implementation of the project is you take the project and kind of go off and spend 2 years, like Ben said, spend 2 years building something. Don't take the domain experts on the journey along with you, come back and they're like, no, this is not what I needed. And I think this is where the fear factor comes in, where you spend so much time and so much money on something and you don't really get what you want. So it's taking them on a journey is the most important thing, and the time frame definitely will vary based on the project.
Yeah, but Kate, I couldn't agree more. Like I know what my team, if they're on or watching this, what they're saying is 90 days, because that's the saying we have, which is in 90 days, we want to deliver some incremental value, something like, maybe that's a roadmap for really complex projects, but hopefully it's something that gives them insight, probably not a working model, but probably some nuggets, some visualizations, maybe some dashboards, and then, a roadmap. And if they're lucky, maybe a prototype, where we can kind of play with what if we had this.
Yeah. I just remembered a quote that I'd love to share. So I was talking to an epidemiologist from New York, and he mentioned kind of off the cuff and said, do you know why my opinion is so valuable? Which sounds incredibly arrogant to kind of say that. Do you know why my opinion is so valuable? And I asked, why? Why is your opinion so valuable? Because of the hundreds and hundreds of mistakes that I have personally made with patient data, which, kind of it went from you're an arrogant jerk to holy cow, like the experience is really meaningful. And so I think when you build something internally, the experience isn't there, the ambition's there, especially if you have new talent, they have the appetite to try. But I think when you work with external partners, they have decades of mistakes, very, very stupid mistakes, accidents, mistakes, where they can draw on that experience to protect you. So I just love that coming from him. Do you know why my opinion is so valuable? So anyway, I love that.
That's a great insight. Thank you. Well, it looks like that is all the questions we'll have time for today. I want to thank our panelists for sharing their knowledge and experience with our audience today. All the thoughts and insights were extremely valuable. And thank you to everyone that has joined us during today's webinar. A recording will be available on the NLP Logix website if you would like to reference the content shared today or share it with fellow colleagues. Thanks again, everyone.
Thank you.